Hello, welcome to the Telegraph webinar on electric cars or EVs. My name's Paul Hudson, I'm the motoring editor of the Telegraph. With me is Vicky Parrott, who's a car of the year juror and a bit of an EV expert, I think it's fair to say. Thank you very much for joining us. Please feel free to fire in all your questions, regardless really. I mean, the focus of this webinar, we really wanted to concentrate on the future, where next. Our position is, we're not saying you must get an electric car, but they are more and more fit for purpose for more and more people. So effectively we know the cars are okay, but what about the rest of it? The future of battery technology, the charging, which always seems to be a bugbear. So fire in your questions on any subject and we'll endeavour to answer them over the next hour or so. We'll keep going. So Vicky, you were thinking really about sort of battery technology.
Yeah, well, I think when we talk about the future of EVs, this is what most people sort of focus on now. Of course, there are some questions over, range anxiety and the charging infrastructure and this kind of thing, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see how battery technology develops over the next few years. For instance, I think it's very likely that we're going to start seeing lead-based battery technology in cheaper electric cars. This has been a problem for quite a while, that lithium-ion technology is so expensive.
Isn't that a step backwards though for lead or that?
Well, obviously lead battery technology, that's a very old technology, but this is obviously, it's a new chemistry mix and it's using a well-known mineral that we know we can source and it's much cheaper. Lead-based batteries won't have the same kind of energy density that lithium-ion batteries do. So you might be looking at, comparably a bit more weight for the range, and already we know that even lithium-ion batteries, we're still really looking to make strides to get more energy density, but they're a lot cheaper.
So it's fair to say that cheaper batteries equals cheaper cars.
So exactly that. So you might not get long-range versions, but you will get probably, a much cheaper car with a, mid 150 to 200 mile range. And I think that sort of car is going to become actually a lot more popular as the charging infrastructure improves. And people start looking to try and get,
That's certainly one of the big questions that we were considering in previous webinars, that a lot of people have maybe tried an electric car and the cars themselves are actually okay. Most people, they cover the majority of journeys, although it's obviously slightly more faff than petrol or diesel, but you soon get used to it. But it's that charging, the concern over charging, which is the
well, it's a bit of a concern. Yeah, exactly. It's a bit of a sort of circular issue, isn't it? Because as soon as you get the better charging infrastructure that we will get, eventually it's taking its time, and there are still a lot of teething problems, but we will get there. As soon as you have that, do you really need long-range cars? And that's why I think in a few years' time, the sort of 200-mile EV that a lot of people might consider not quite enough for them now will actually be more than fine.
I think so. I mean, there's a bit of a move at the moment. Obviously, given that most people have some form of range anxiety, is that a lot of manufacturers, particularly the Germans, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mercedes and BMW et al., coming up with these longer range batteries, which sounds fine in theory, but essentially longer range means more battery, which means more weight.
Of course, yeah.
So there's a penalty. So
I think we will still have a demand for that in the sort of super luxury classes. So your EQSs and this kind of thing, which have got a 450 mile range. I think there is demand for that in chauffeur cars and limo style things. But I think we'll start to see a shift in the more affordable EVs towards having perhaps a lighter weight and a smaller battery. And a circa, which we already see quite routinely, sort of 200 to 250 miles, maybe 300 miles at a push. And that will become, the sort of the middle of the EV market for most people. Yeah. I mean, I think cars like the Honda E and the Mini Electric actually are quite forward thinking. I think those are going to be quite in demand as well, especially when we do get the charging infrastructure that I think is fairly inevitable.
Yeah, I think we have to stress that those are predominantly urban cars. Obviously you're going to be struggling to do a longer journey in those, or without planning a number of stops. But again, how often do you need that? Or
you get a 100-mile range car, but then I still think there is call for that. So it'll be interesting to see how the market develops.
I had a Honda E, and most of my driving in and around the capital, I was only charging it once every 3 weeks.
Exactly. So precisely that, and there's loads of people that live like that. Whereas I do lots of mileage, sort of 15,000 miles and more a year. We've actually had somebody write in and say they're doing 400 kilometres tomorrow in their EV. Had loads of EVs all in the family, and they've got no range anxiety at all. So, like I said, you do get used to running electric vehicles, is that kind of thing. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that develops.
Sure, yeah.
Over the next few years, I think.
Okay, I know your questions are flooding in. So the first one is that from Mike? Is there any possibility of a CHAdeMO to CCS adapter for rapid public chargers? That's way beyond my technical capacity, so I'll hand over to Vicky.
Well, do you know what? I think it's fairly unlikely, I have to say, but I don't see why there shouldn't really be the technical ability to do that. It is a frustration because obviously the Nissan Leaf, for instance, has been one of the most popular EVs for the last decade and more, and yet that's a CHAdeMO, which is a different socket type, rapid charging. But the problem is everybody else has gone to CCS, so you're left with the Nissan Leaf and and a couple of others. I would add there are actually still quite a lot of CHAdeMO public chargers across the country. Many thousands in fact, but I do sympathise. If I'm honest, I don't actually know the answer for sure to that. I would be, maybe a third-party company will provide it. I'm not quite sure.
In theory, it's doable.
Yes.
It depends on the will.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Another one from Facebook. Michael Brannigan Harris says, more electric batteries equals more business to China. That's one of the issues we've sort of covered before on batteries. It's just obviously the precious metals involved as well, not just where they come from. There's obviously sort of concern about the mining in Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, as well. So it's not a panacea, as we know. So a lot of I think there's more investment. It's slower to start than Germany's doing it. We are over here. I think is it Gigavolt or British Volt building a new.
British Volt have got their new sort of factory going up, which is battery recycling as well as battery production, and various other things, which is great news. I think the sourcing of metals is one of the big concerns for a lot of people with the future EVs. Ultimately, I actually think we have got bigger issues to cross before then. But yes, you're right. I mean, I would add there are solutions to this in that, for instance, BMW and I think Tesla now as well might be sourcing its cobalt from Australia, where there are a number of cobalt mines opening up. So there are differing sources beginning to kind of make appearances now. And I think as the industry ramps up, that's going to become more and more common because there's all sorts of reasons, of course, why people want to actually reduce their dependence on the Democratic Republic of Congo has been a major source of cobalt for a long time, and issues over human rights as well as anything else is a big issue. But we are gradually starting to see that move away. And I would add, going back to battery technology, there are an awful lot of cobalt-free battery technologies out there that are actually they're already functioning. They might not be in mainstream use.
Right, that's interesting. Yeah.
Actually, there are cobalt-free batteries in sort of buses and this kind of thing already in mainstream use, and I think we will see those in passenger cars fairly soon. Yeah. Probably, maybe realistically, the next 2 or 3 years, something like that. It's always difficult to put a date on it, but there's so much incentive for manufacturers.
But there are major manufacturers involved.
Oh in that. Absolutely. Renault, Nissan. I mean, a few years ago, Renault, Nissan were telling me they were going to have cobalt-free batteries by about 2025. Whether that's still on board or not, because I recently spoke to a boss of Renault and he was saying he thinks lithium-ion is going to hang about a bit longer for financial reasons more than anything. Yeah. Because at the moment manufacturers are under so much pressure to just maintain a profit margin because production costs are going up so much. And obviously consumers can only afford so much for a car as well, and I'm talking about ICE as well as EV at this point. Yeah. So there's a lot of pressures on the industry from that direction. But like I said, there are so many incentives, financial and otherwise, to try and get cobalt-free batteries into mainstream production that I think it will happen.
It's funny, we mentioned the old Betamax versus VHS conundrum of a while back, and Philip Pages had mentioned, I'm wondering if the lack of standardisation across public charging outlets will ever be resolved under the present funding. I mean, have you got any insight into that?
Well, I'm assuming we're talking about standardisation in terms of, socket types, we're pretty much there. Everything now is CCS Type 2, or there are still, most new places do also have CHAdeMO going in as well, although it is phasing out now. So we do have a standardised socket type. As for standardised providers, I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think we've already got so many kind of main big players in the charging world. So that unfortunately is something that we're just going to have to deal with, but we've managed it with petrol stations throughout the years.
I think somebody had said that to me the other day, because I've got an account with BP Pulse and Charge London and various other things where you've got the app or the RFID card. But somebody said to me, well, it's like favouring Shell petrol stations. You don't. Exactly. There are others, but you don't have to. You do
tend to favour the ones that you've got your membership card or your points system or whatever with, don't you? Yes, but I think it will come down to that. I mean, I certainly don't think we're going to see, we're going to see the big charge providers disappear. But like I said, I think when you do run an electric car, you find that because you generally use the same routes, and you normally find that you end up using the same providers quite often as well. So in reality, it's a really daunting thing if you've not had an EV before and you're not used to it and you're worried about the public charging. You kind of worry about having all the different kind of membership apps and this kind of
Yes,
stuff.
yeah.
But in truth, you can contactless charge at all new rapid charging stations. And I think just get a membership card for the ones that you use most frequently, and at that point, really, you find that it just becomes quite
concur.
intuitive.
That's sound advice. It's exactly what I've done. Because I've done most of my driving sort of fairly local, but on occasionally longer journeys, as long as you find out where the chargers are, I found Osprey to be quite good. It's not the cheapest, but it's
Osprey's good. Instavolt's really
very,
good.
Very quick.
All of that, and I've got BP membership as well because that's one of the most routine ones on my route, and Shell. And I do, like I said, quite high mileage by EV standards, and I nearly always end up on the same main motorways, A34, M3, M1, this kind of thing. And you find out roughly where the chargers are that you need on the routes that you take, and it becomes really easy. And you stop relying on Zap Maps endlessly to kind of find chargers all the time, and it just becomes a normal thing. So it gets easier.
Okay, Martin wants to know, are we going to see the public charging and battery technology issues finally resolved just in time for hydrogen to take over? That's a very good question, actually.
I don't believe so, no. I think hydrogen is still quite distant in the future. I do think it's part of the solution, but I think hydrogen will come in first for use in commercial vehicles, and that might be a good 5 to 10 years after its sort of introduction into that sort of area that we might see it trickle into passenger cars.
Point of view, isn't it? It's for like trucks, buses, the heavy duty.
There's all sorts of different issues with hydrogen, primarily the fact that obviously we've put a huge amount of funding into battery EVs now, and we have the infrastructure for battery EVs already. They're out there and they're doing the job. And for the government to now turn around, and for private companies to turn around and put the money in to provide a hydrogen infrastructure is a phenomenal thing to sort of face right now.
Germany and to a slightly lesser extent France have more veering towards the hydrogen route, but
I think it will be part of the solution. But I think it's quite a long way away, and I think that the battery EV transition will have probably already pretty much settled down and be kind of like in place by the time that hydrogen even becomes a consideration. But like I said, for heavy goods vehicles and commercial vehicles, I think hydrogen probably is going to be quite a big part of the solution. And as we saw with diesel, I think when that becomes embedded in commercial vehicles, it might trickle down into passenger cars. But it's hard to tell depending on because I believe that people's use of private cars and things is probably going to change generally.
Well, absolutely. I mean,
you in the next decade and so
made the point there that it's all part of a general solution. I mean, not saying anything's right or wrong. It depends on public need, public wants, and government policy. There's a whole variety of things. So we actually quite hydrogen technology does exist. The Toyota Mirai, which I had the pleasure of driving, is fantastic.
It's
car.
lovely. Yeah, I've
it's
driven
really,
it too.
really good.
Really good.
But there are only 13 hydrogen filling stations in the whole of the UK.
And Renault's just launched its hydrogen plug-in hybrid.
Oh, that's right,
which is quite an interesting technology. And I've seen that before from other manufacturers too. So you get the hydrogen fuel cell for your long-distance journeys, and you get your battery in there as well for the kind of around town. So that sort of makes sense.
Best of both worlds.
I don't know about the cost of that, of having both of those technologies in one car at this point would be prohibitive, I suspect. But it's interesting, and Toyota's ramping up production of their hydrogen fuel cells, and the new Mirai is a fantastic thing. But Japan already has quite a much better hydrogen infrastructure than we do. So they're already ahead of us on that front.
It's an interesting point, actually. Steve mentions that we already have the hydrogen infrastructure. Presumably that means adapting LPG installations. Do you know if that's technically feasible, or is that?
I don't know if you can adapt LPG to hydrogen. I think there's a bit more to it than that.
Right.
And also
I would imagine so, but
the other issue is also actually getting the hydrogen to the stations in a green fashion, because if we're then going to be taking tankers full of hydrogen to petrol stations all over the place, or hydrogen stations in fossil fuel powered lorries and things, then you end up with a kind of like a strange, it's doing it in a way that's actually sustainable and better for the environment.
I think that just digressing slightly as well, that's another issue that bugs a lot of people about the precious metals in lithium-ion batteries.
Of course,
because it's fine if you dig it up in Australia, but it's got to be put on a ship and transported to wherever the batteries are made.
Absolutely.
That uses CO2, doesn't it?
No, of course it does.
There's no such thing as the free lunches.
No.
My colleague Andrew English likes to say.
Absolutely. But then again, there is also the flip side of that roughly 30% of the fuel that we burn in heavy cargo ships is transporting fossil fuels.
Oh, okay.
So there's kind of a, yes, absolutely. Sourcing metals for batteries and things from the other side of the world is not an environmentally friendly thing, but neither is transporting so much fossil fuels all around the planet all the time. So
that's a fair point.
There's difficulties on both sides. There's no battery EVs aren't the silver bullet. They're not the solution to all of it by any stretch, but they're a big part of personal transport solution. So yeah, and hydrogen I think will come, but I think it's still a long way away.
Okay. Somebody's asking about domestic charging points, which no one ever seems to address. Well, we have done in previous instalments of this webinar, but Edward Finnemore says the government grant requires a smart meter, but he doesn't seem to think there's any technical reason why that should be necessary. Is that in your field of expertise?
So
this is a public government grant for home charging.
Do you know what? I'm not sure about that. I don't know. I have had I had my charger installed and they didn't require a smart meter at the time, I don't believe, but that was a couple of years ago.
Since they've reduced the grant, maybe that's one of the new requirements. I mean,
yes. Well, there is no grant on a domestic charger anymore, so I don't think it's ended. So I don't think that they can.
Yeah, sorry.
But whether they will need a smart meter to, I mean, it would certainly be helpful, I suppose, but I don't see why it should be obligatory, especially since the government incentive has ended. So I don't think they can enforce that, really,
okay.
at this point.
We'll look into that, Mr. Finnemore, so I think that's a good one to follow up later. So another one from Philip Page. He says it's hardly encouraging to hear his answer concerning various charging outlets. He does not agree that the majority who drive the same routes will not be worried about potential problems of going elsewhere. Well, I mean, Vicky does it. Vicky's a high mileage EV driver. I mean, most of my driving is in and around the capital, but I've made a lot of longer journeys in electric cars, and honestly, it's not that bad. You need to plan a little bit more than you would with a petrol diesel car, but I'm not trying to bang the drum for EVs, but you become naturally, I think, quite a fan. I mean, I used to bang on about hybrids, saying, hybrids are the best solution between, a halfway house, if you like. Sorry, I sound very evangelist here, but they were like a halfway house between petrol and fully electric. But now I think the electric cars are so good, unless in certain instances where you can plug in a hybrid and use the electric power in urban driving, really, why would you want a hybrid? I mean,
I think plug-in hybrids are a bit of a difficult one these days to, I've always felt that the technology's sort of dating a bit too fast for its own good to an extent. I mean, obviously you get long-range plug-in hybrids now in the form of the X5 and the new Range Rover and this kind of thing, but when we're talking about putting a 30 to 40 kilowatt hour battery in a vehicle that then only does sort of 70 miles to a charge because it's so enormous and it has a big engine as well, I think it's a bit difficult, really. I mean, it's convenient, but I think the environmental aspect of it's a bit questionable, to be honest. And I would add that with the EV thing, again, I mean, I really love electric vehicles. I do high mileage in them, but I would still say if you do really high miles and you routinely do journeys that are out in the wilderness, then probably you are better off taking a diesel or something along those lines, just a standard diesel.
Diesel has been demonised, but I mean, it's
diesel's
still
great. You could still get 50, 60 mpg easily, and there's the complete freedom of the just filling up at a petrol station, no issues whatsoever. So absolutely, I'm all in favour of that. And there are still sort of deserts of rapid charging out in quite sort of provincial areas of the UK, this kind of thing. I say provincial, that's a bit offensive, isn't it? But further off the main motorways is what I mean. I mean, I've had it go on holiday to deepest Wales or deepest Cornwall and this kind of thing, and you're worrying about where you're going to charge, and you do have to plan. It is a compromise over running a diesel or petrol car right now. That is no question. And I wrote about this. I did the article on a diary of charging in a sort of mid-range 200-mile car, which I do all the time. And sometimes it's a pain. There's a queue at the chargers, or the charger's not functioning, which is rarer, I think, than people think, but still an issue, and it shouldn't be. I'm all in favour of having proper charging hubs that actually are staffed, so people can kind of like make sure they're functioning properly. I think that's what we need to be looking at, as you would a petrol station today. Regardless of that, yes, it's still a compromise, and if you are concerned about the freedom of being able to step out your front door and do 600 miles in a day to anywhere in the world without worrying about an app or charging, then a diesel is probably for you. Yeah,
I think just to digress slightly, my colleague Alex Robbins drove a C-Class Mercedes, not the cheapest car, but by no means the most expensive, and he averaged 73 miles per gallon in a diesel, 2-litre diesel C-Class.
Great, isn't it? I know.
What's not to like, really?
Absolutely. I ran the diesel plug-in hybrid E-Class a few years back, and that was interesting because that would do sort of 53, 55 mpg without trying very hard, and then it had a sort of 30-mile electric range, and I really liked that car for that. I thought that sort of, and it's a fairly modest sort of 2-litre diesel, and also even the NOx emissions on very modern diesels actually in sort of independent tests have proven to be barely any worse than a modern petrol anyway. So I think diesel had, for all sorts of political and various reasons, diesel has been a bit demonised, and like I say, there are compromises to running an EV, but I think the vast majority of drivers these days could live with a modern EV fairly easily, but we do need improvements in the charging infrastructure, of course.
And those people who think we're banging the drum for EVs, like we were just now banging the drum for diesel. So, again, our view is there's a holistic solution, horses for courses, if you like, that, for some people suit a diesel, other people suit an electric car, and it's we have that choice. Not for much longer, because obviously there's a ban in 2030 on new petrol and diesel engine cars, but until then, at least we have that choice, and there will still be used cars available. So that's the future's bright.
Philip gets 50 plus MPG from his 3-litre BMW, which is all good. It's good. I love the 530D, that's all good. The E-Class I ran did sort of 30 miles electric, and then it did sort of 53, 54 MPG thereafter. So you got the extra weight of the batteries, but you also get the benefit of the pure electric running in it too around town, so you get the tax benefits and cleaner emissions and stuff around town. So there's that. I think combined it was doing sort of 65, 70, but like you say, Alex got that out of a standard diesel in the Mercedes recently.
Yes, and he wasn't. He's not renowned for his feather-footed driving, shall we say? So, that was with his family aboard. But again, without doing being a exceptionally feather-footed economy run, it was just an average journey to see his parents. A bit of motorway, bit of A road. A normal journey, and he averaged 73 miles per gallon, which is, I think, fantastic.
I think with modern diesel, I think plug-in hybrids, I do sometimes struggle to see why you would, I have to confess, even though, I know they're quite popular, but it's a tricky thing. I think if you live in central London, I can understand, but other than that, maybe
I think, but again, we had the thing with the Mitsubishi Outlander, didn't we, that, I'm not saying it's a bad car, it's just that they were very, very popular for a short while because of the tax breaks that were given to plug-in hybrids, and, you can't blame people for, obviously loads of people
bought
diesel.
There's all that research of people buying them and not plugging them in and this kind of thing, weren't they?
But the government said, buy diesel because it's low CO2. And everybody went and bought diesel, and then the government turns around and says, well, no, diesel's bad. And people are saying rightly, well, no, you told me diesel was okay. And
I think it's a shame that company car incentives have sort of demonised diesel as well, really, in the past few years. But that's where it's going, and at least they've been excellent for EVs and promise to be for a while longer yet. So there's still kind of a popular thing on that front.
Going back to public charges, Mike says he's found recently that the level of non-functioning public chargers has worsened, and about 50% are not working at any one time. Obviously, we don't know where Mike's from, but that hasn't been my experience, I must say. I'm quite lucky in a way because the car park like you most has some chargers in there, so I can just charge up the car and just get stuck in meetings, and then I overstay the hour and a half limit on the charger and get charged £8. But that's occasionally one of them. There's two rapid chargers there. I shan't name them the supplier, but they're usually pretty good. Sometimes one of them's out of commission. I'd say once a month, but one of the two is always working in my experience. So
it's not really good enough, though, is it? They should both be working all of the time.
I guess
it's that frustrating thing, isn't it?
I
have to say I've not experienced that level of issues with the rapid chargers that I'm using, but I suppose I do generally use sort of really quite heavily used sort of charging hubs on the A34. The M3 is quite poorly serviced for rapid chargers, surprisingly, at the moment. So I live in the south coast, so I'm constantly up and down, up the M1 and this kind of thing. But they're normally sort of major artery roads, so I think they do tend to get fixed quite quickly if they're not working.
Right, okay.
But yes, I do. I have encountered a few that don't work. Sometimes, frustratingly, I've found actually the actual contactless card payment thing sometimes is the issue rather than the charger itself.
But we're using a credit or debit card.
Yeah, when you're just doing a tap and go.
Yes, okay.
I've had issues with those a few times.
Right, okay, that's interesting.
And so, like I said, I think it needs to be approached as, if we're really going to take up EVs for, by 2030, if we're going to ban the sale of new petrol and diesel cars, we need to have an infrastructure in place that's not just numerous and widespread, but it needs to be well maintained. And I think that is actually becoming a bigger issue now in terms of actually having staff on site to help, not having to sit on the phone for half an hour to get through to somebody to make the charger work and this kind of thing, which I've had before. And it's always kind of soul destroying when you've just got a journey and you just want to get home and whatever.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, like you
always
say,
happens when it's throwing down with rain and it's like 11 o'clock at night. And this kind of
should
thing
just
as well.
work, shouldn't it?
It should just work. But there are issues because it's high voltage electrics and often people drop the charging cables and it gets heavily used and this kind of thing. And like I said, we need to get to a point where, the really, the heavily used rapid chargers, in fact, really most of them should be staffed and there should be somebody who can on site who can sort of, help if there's an issue, or, charger providers need to have a system whereby they automatically see that a charger isn't functioning and automatically reset. It's frustrated me
that shouldn't be beyond the wit of modern technology, wouldn't you?
It surely is, because you call them and they go, oh yes, I can see there's an issue. And you're like, well, surely shouldn't an alarm go off somewhere and you can kind of hit the reset button automatically rather than me having to sit on the phone waiting.
I think it's interesting what you're saying earlier, that obviously a core target of electric car usage is in urban areas, but the fact you live on the south coast, so obviously there's sort of like, obviously you travel for your job as a journalist, so it's interesting having that perspective rather than a purely metropolitan perspective, because I mean, I'd say most of my driving's in and around London, so I appreciate that's not representative of people elsewhere in the UK, so I mean, I'm not going to tell them, oh, you must buy an electric car. But they also, conversely, they might suit. But I think it's interesting your experiences that you've written about of being a high mileage EV driver. And would you say it's more a matter of planning more than anything, or is there really no difference anymore?
I don't even plan if I'm doing, because I'm nearly always, even though I'm quite routinely going to different places, I'm nearly always doing the bulk of the journey on the same motorways. So I know where the significant charges are that I might want to use, and I can gauge fairly quickly what the real world range of the vehicle is that I'm going to be in, and is the weather bad, and this, it's all stuff. When you're first looking at an EV, it's quite daunting because it's not something that we consider when you're driving petrol or diesel, but you do get used to it.
Sure.
And I mean, I have had really frustrating moments with charging, even in recent times. I had one run back from London, and I didn't have enough charge in the car and had to stop, and then the charger somebody was already there, and it was struggling to charge for them, and then the blah blah blah, and then it was kind of like and it's still not what it should be, but it really isn't generally a problem. It's something that happens once every 2 or 3 months, and yet I do, like I said, more mileage than most. Not as much as plenty of other people who do run electric vehicles. I know quite a few others who do far more mileage than I do. I have quite typical usage of a lot of people in that, 2 or 3 days a week I might do a local trip into the shops or whatever, literally 5 to 10 miles at most. And then maybe once or twice a week I might be doing a journey of 150 to 250 miles for work or to go somewhere to see something, whatever. And I very rarely have issues. Sometimes I have to wait, sometimes I have to, but it's not that often. More often than not, I can do it without really having to, and I certainly don't have to check where the chargers are anymore because I sort of know where they all are. But
talking of charging, Stuart Sear says, what about the 40% of people with no access to designated parking and therefore charging? Also, there's obviously the issue of the cost of buying an electric car in the first place. I mean, firstly, can I say, I don't have access to charging at home. I live in a flat. I live in a big city, and an EV generally suits my car usage, but I've nowhere to charge it, so I'm reliant on public charging, which is part of the test, really. We know the cars are quite good, but sometimes the infrastructure can be few and far between.
No, I think this is the biggest problem for the transition to EVs now. I think it's that, and I completely agree. There's a huge demographic of people who can't even consider spending £30,000 on a new car or £300 a month or whatever, and they might not have driveways at home and this kind of thing. There are solutions coming in that quite a lot of local authorities are looking at cross-pave charging solutions, which range from being as simple as literally kind of basically a sort of a dip in the pavement and then a sort of safety thing over the top so you can run your cable through. There are also third-party charging apps which are now becoming reasonably popular in more built-up sort of suburban areas. That works quite well for a lot of people who like live in housing estates like I do and lots of people do and this kind of thing, and you can borrow your neighbours charging and this kind of thing. And between those two solutions, I think that will cover a lot of people. I think we need to see landlords and those people who sort of own the leases to own the flats and this kind of thing need to take some responsibility for providing charging in
I think there are some new building
parking spaces. Yeah.
There are some new building regulations as well, aren't there, which mandate a certain proportion of rapid chargers. Again, I haven't read them in detail, but I mean, again, it's just part of this holistic process that we're getting there. You know, we tend to be a bit disorganised and disjointed sometimes, but it is happening probably a bit too slowly for most. But
it's getting three-phase charging into places like that as well, into blocks of flats, so that you have the necessary kind of electricity to charge a number of cars at the same time, and this kind of thing. And that's frustrating because it's in the lampposts and in the sort of industrial wiring of towns all over the place, and yet it's quite phenomenally expensive to run into a sort of the car park of a flat. Or you know, I know somebody who's got a boatyard that's just paid hundreds of thousands to run three-phase into the boatyard, so people can charge their marine equipment, which is also going to battery EV and this kind of thing. So as a sort of future-proofing thing. So it's there are definitely, that aspect is an interesting one, and I think it has been picked up as the big hurdle now, and I think we will see solutions soon. I hope. So
here's a chance to get political. Philip Page says, bearing in mind the no confidence vote last night, we may have a change to the banning of diesel and petrol by 2030. Let's hope so, he says. Maybe we are to be dissuaded from driving at all. That's a bit of a bleak vision, but... well,
I mean, I disagree, I have to say, but there you go. It's I'm not going to get political about it, but I think that 2030 is quite feasible for banning petrol and diesel sales. I wouldn't perhaps be against extending that by a couple of years maybe, but we're not the only country. There's countries all over Europe have said as well that they're banning petrol and diesel cars. Not only that, but you've got India, you've got really most of the significant car markets have already said that they are going to do this. It's not just a UK political sort of field. You know, I do think it's quite achievable actually. And yes, I do think there is an aspect of probably there being a move towards us driving less in general. I think post-COVID and post various legislative changes with cars, with living costs going up and this kind of thing, I think unfortunately, and I love driving. I do. I own an old classic car and all sorts of things, and that makes me quite sad as well. But I do think it might go that way a little bit, particularly with urban around cities and stuff.
I think so. I think it's already happening with low emission zones.
Increasingly, people just don't need and don't want a car anyway. So. Maybe we'll see that stretch out a bit more to suburbia, but I still think out in anyone who lives out in more rural UK knows that it's very, very difficult to live without a car. So
sure. Can I just respond to Kevin when I mentioned about like the chargers I use now, car park, 1 out of 2 working, and he says, just the issue is the length of time taken to charge. If I add a bit more detail to that, the length of time at the maximum stay is 90 minutes. In which time I can get, and I have a Polestar 2 at the moment, I think that could charge us from 0 to about 80% in that time, 75, 80% in that time. So it's enough, but sometimes I get stuck in the office and I leg it down the car park and I'm not quite in time. That's my own fault, my terrible timekeeping. But I think for most applications, an hour and a half's worth of rapid charge is 50 kilowatt charger. An hour and a half's worth of 50 kilowatt charging is, it'll get you places.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I think with rapid charging in town, I actually think that having a 90-minute to 2-hour limit is probably about right. Because the problem is you're going to have lots of people wanting to use them.
I think so. And
so sitting on it for 8 hours while you're in the office is
one of those frustrations, and it's not fair on other users as well, is it?
But we definitely need more kind of like free time limits on the lower sort of 7 kilowatt chargers and this kind of thing, and so I mean you spend a lot more time in London than I. Do you not have like a curbside charger near your house?
I have some of the lamppost chargers. I mean it's a 5-minute walk from my house, but the nearest one. But sometimes it's great, but you can just plug it in overnight and leave it, and as long as nobody's parked there, that's the trouble. It's a general parking zone. You go, great, I'll use the lamppost charger, and it's not a dedicated EV charging bay. So
I think
that's quite rightly, residents can park there and.
Yeah, we all focus on the rapid charging, don't we? And I think actually, especially going back to the question about how people can charge who don't have driveways and private parking, I think that's another part of it too, is increasing curbside charging. I think that's really important. So.
That's interesting. Martin says he lives in central London. There's just two car chargers locally, but only one parking place to use it. I don't know how that works. I mean, it's funny that some of them because they have 2 connectors. I've encountered. I can't remember what the car was. A Leaf? No, that's got a plug-in on the front. There was something with a charger in the back where a petrol filler would normally be, and you have to go on busy street. You have to basically go in the wrong way.
Yeah.
For the cable to reach from the.
Oh yeah, if you've got the charger on the rear wing of the car, or there's something on there.
I mean, and the cable supplied with the car, well, there's no way it was going to reach. It was ridiculously short, and again, it's that just lack of detail that can really annoy you. Sorry, I was going to use another phrase there, but really annoy you.
But so, that's exactly the sort of logistical thing that crops up with electric cars. Excuse me, and. It's just such a frustration, and it's just something they don't think when putting the chargers in. And I mean, there's been sort of an overall, since the ruling about charging in public stations on the motorways has changed recently, or at least GridServe has taken over, and now in a couple of years other providers are going to be able to join in as well. There's kind of a board now looking at actually access to these chargers, because disabled drivers, it's really tricky. And all sorts of things, but the actual accessibility and the layout of chargers is becoming a thing now as well, thankfully, because not only that, which is awful, but you get, they never have shelters, they don't have lighting, it's kind of, it's really poor.
Yes,
and it's just really frustrating that wasn't thought about from the off, really.
As a service, I mean, I've not used one yet, but there are quite a number of things, and they're getting more numerous almost by the week of dedicated EV charging stations, like a petrol diesel station, but just purely for electric cars, and they seem fantastic. They're all rapid chargers. You've got a kiosk there. You can buy your sandwich or whatever as you would as a regular petrol station. So obviously that would seem to be the way forward. But obviously, again, it's investment. Who wants to pay? We all demand these services, but I mean, who's going to pay for that? Is it like the energy providers, or we don't know, government?
It's going to be, for flats and things, it's going to be the developers, isn't it? Which is probably where it should lie.
Yeah.
But it is a tricky one, you're right, that one.
Yeah. And no need to apologise, Kevin. I didn't make myself very clear, but somebody heard on the radio that over 60% of electricity required to charge the UK's electric vehicles comes from the use of fossil fuels to provide it. I suspect not. Maybe you've got more ideas than that. I thought it was at least 50%.
Yeah, well, renewables are nearly, so we were actually up to nearly 60% renewables, I think, in 2019, and 2020, 2021, it was slightly less than that because of the wind dropped, and wind is the primary source of renewable energy that we use. So I think it was just under 30% last year, and I think it might be running at slightly more than that at the moment. I think we need massive investment in renewable energy. You're completely right. This is one of the arguments about EVs. Is
depending where you get your numbers from, it's still not good enough, shall we say?
No.
Even without electric cars, obviously it would just make sense if more and more of our electricity is renewable.
Yeah, it's a real frustration, I think. But I mean, we do at least seem to be heading in the right direction. I think that I think the government's looking at sort of easing the restrictions on putting wind farms on land. I can completely understand why some people are against that, but I do think offshore wind farms, I think more of those. I think wind seems to be quite a successful one. I think more solar panels. It seems like
there's quite a huge anti-windmill brigade, but I mean,
of course, and I understand both sides of that argument as well. But I do think there's no question that one way or another we need more renewable energy, and it's got to come from somewhere. And so we need to put the investment in, and we need to find a way of doing it. And there's no question other than the fact we have to do it. It's got to happen. But the thing with EVs, yes, at the moment, 50 to, probably more like 50% than 60% is from fossil fuel-based energy, but it's getting better all the time. So you're looking at a car that gets greener as the grid gets greener, which is something that fossil-fueled cars, of course, don't. So that's the flip side of that argument.
Yeah, okay. Going back to hydrogen again, Tom wants to know, could we see battery power quickly overtaken by hydrogen technology? We sort of covered that, and also somebody mentioning the VHS and Betamax analogy, so there must be something in that. So the refueling time, I mean, I think that's getting better. Again, I can get sort of 75 to 80% charge in a Polestar in 75 to 80 minutes. Sorry, 90 minutes. That's obviously a lot longer than it would take to fill with petrol, diesel, or indeed hydrogen. But while I think the money's been put into the invested into the battery electric infrastructure, hydrogen's really been left behind for sort of heavy transport, and as Vicky touched on earlier, obviously I can't see the government doing a U-turn. I mean, they have made the odd one before, but I think it's pretty much set in stone now that as far as government and the establishment's concerned, battery electric is the way to go. So,
well, battery EVs already are 11% of the new car sales. They're already, many hundreds of thousands of them. We sold 190,000 of them last year alone. The infrastructure is there. People are using them every day very successfully, and they are reducing. They are the greener option than petrol or diesel as a new EV versus a new petrol or diesel car for sure. There are always arguments against EVs in terms of the minerals you put in the batteries and all this kind of thing. Hydrogen is a really interesting one, and like I said, I think it will become a big part in terms of heavy goods vehicles and commercial vehicles initially. What I would add is that battery EVs also are very good, because if you look at the actual energy consumed by the vehicle, it's still probably about half to maybe even a third of the energy that a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle uses. Hydrogen's got loads of benefits in terms of you can fill it up as quickly as you can a petrol or a diesel car, and then it's got a range of 450, 500 miles, this kind of thing, the Nexo and the Mirai and all this stuff. So I think it's a really interesting technology, and I think it will be part of it. I think it's a long way away, and I do think there are still difficulties with hydrogen in terms of storing it, transporting it, making it, having the infrastructure.
Making it, I mean, that's trouble. You need a lot of energy to create the liquefied hydrogen in the first place.
It's not insurmountable, but I think I know it's been 10 years away for a very long time, hasn't it, hydrogen? Probably about 20 years, but I think it's probably still that away still. So we'll see how it goes, but could be part of it.
Feel free to send in your questions still, by the way. We'll get around to them, answering as many as we can. John wants to know, what is your experience of range reduction during the winter months when you're using heating and lighting? And
so that's an interesting one, because it does vary a bit depending on the vehicle, but every EV, battery EV, you will see quite a significant reduction when the weather's cold. Headwinds, if it's really windy, that has a big difference. So I mean, I think you can actually see a difference of as much as 50% in your range between winter journeys and summer journeys. So on the motorway, high speeds, cold temperatures, those are your enemy in the range on an electric vehicle. And like I said, actually very strong winds can really sort of drop your range as well. So the worse the weather, the shorter your range. But for instance, so I had a Peugeot E208, which has an official range of just over 200 miles. And I mean, I would see only 100 miles from that in real world use. I would say on a steady motorway journey in appalling winter conditions, and it would do 100 miles. More realistically, in kind of middling UK type winter journeys, more like 120. But then in the summer, it would actually do 180 to 190 if it was a fairly easy motorway journey, and it would do over 200 miles sometimes if I was just pottering around town and this kind of thing. So the range on EVs does change quite drastically, and it's one of the things that you do come to get used to. It's a right pain sometimes. It's again one of those compromises that you do have to live with. And I think again, if you're a very high mileage driver that does routinely sort of 200 to 300 miles per day, of which I think there are very few people left who do that kind of mileage, but certainly there is still a market, then you do need to think about that very carefully when you're looking at an EV. Yeah,
I think there is still that, that disparity between the official claimed range that the manufacturers are obliged to quote and what you actually achieve in the real world.
WLTP combined,
Going back to my Polestar, the official claimed range is 292 miles. The most I've ever got on a full charge is 252. So which is still not bad. I mean, you can go a long way on 250 miles with the charge, but then again, it's the same with petrol and diesel. The official economy figures that the manufacturers are legally obliged to quote are not what you'd see in the real world. The tests have become more representative, but they're still not, exactly what you'd get.
Yeah.
So I think you have to take that into account for any car, really.
And I'd add that the flip side of that is you do get more efficient EVs as well. So for instance, I ran a Kia e-Niro, so obviously the generation that's just about to be replaced. And that had an official range of about just under 300 miles. And that was a really efficient car. So even on the motorway, even in the cold, it would still do about 240, 250. It was really impressive. And then in the summer, I used to get quite a lot over 300 sometimes. So that was probably the most efficient EV. And the Hyundai Kona, which is the same platform. And Kia and Hyundai, their sort of single motor EVs seem to be really efficient.
I think that's a really interesting point that we tend to get hung up, or everybody tends to get hung up on range, and we'll only do 200 miles an hour, or we'll do 500 miles an hour in the case of the Mercedes EQS. But it doesn't really help a lot if it's not very efficient. So probably a smaller battery, single motor, which is lighter as well, is possibly more efficient than a big, heavy battery-powered SUV.
I think with the rise in electricity costs, this is going to see, quite rightly, more of a focus on the efficiency in EVs rather than just on the straightforward range, because that makes a big difference. If you're going to buy an Audi e-tron that's got four-wheel drive and 400 brake horsepower, then you're going to get half the efficiency that you are if you buy a Kia that's got front-wheel drive and 200 brake horsepower. So it's kind of that's a bit simplistic, but it's getting on for that.
No, but
it makes a huge difference. If you want a high-powered big SUV, then you're going to get less efficiency. But until now, because electricity's been that cheap, often people haven't really bothered thinking about it that much. But now you're looking to start to see quite different sort of running costs between the cheaper end and the more efficient EVs and the higher powered, because the cost of the fuel's gone up.
Since we're talking about the future, I mean, if you can just grab your crystal ball for a second, do you imagine that electricity prices are going to stay high for short to medium term?
It certainly seems like it, doesn't it? I think they've announced that the energy price cap is even going up, I think, in October, I believe, which is unfortunate. And I think it's a really tough time for, regardless of whether you run an EV or petrol or diesel. It's all gone up so much. The living cost crisis is no joke for anybody. I don't see electric prices dropping anytime soon. I think now that they've reached this point, I think they're unlikely to drop again significantly. It is gas prices that have jumped by the highest margin, rather than electricity. And I would add there are still some providers out there that are offering kind of lower price overnight tariffs. So it's well worth kind of shopping about for those, because if you do run an EV routinely, and you can get away with mostly home charging, then if you can do that and just charge it for 3 or 4 hours overnight in the middle of the night, then you can still get really cheap electricity. But it's getting harder and harder to achieve that, I think. So unfortunately, prices of EVs have run up, but they're still, it still works out at roughly 50% the cost of running a standard sort of petrol car generally, something like that.
We were talking about this earlier as well, and obviously since the part of the issue today we're discussing is the future. Obviously the government's going to want its money back that it's losing on fuel duty. So is it that £36 billion black hole predicted in the government revenue? That's going to have to be clawed back somehow, somewhere. So whether that's road pricing and more expensive electricity, electricity could be taxed more highly as fuel is now. Petrol, diesel are now. We don't know, obviously, but it's something else for the future that, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but I think it's probably going to become more expensive before it gets any cheaper.
I think it that way. Will. I mean, I would certainly advocate, charging per energy rather than road price. I don't really like the idea of road pricing at all. I think it's a tricky one to sell to people, and I don't think it doesn't encourage you to drive an efficient vehicle. You don't get any benefits from driving a lower, and electric cars, they know exactly how much energy has gone into the car and out. So I don't see why that couldn't be taxed rather than road pricing.
That's a good point,
This is my crystal ball, and it's not always that reliable, so we'll have to see what happens. But certainly, that would be my take on it, is I think people should be encouraged to buy, if we're doing this for the environment, we should be encouraging people to buy the more efficient vehicle. And lots of people can't live without a car, and it's a tricky one. So we'll see where the politics takes that. But certainly that's I don't like the idea of road pricing personally. It's a difficult one to get your head around.
I think any government might be struggling to get that one through as well. So, but talking of government, I mean, do you think there should be more assistance from government, whoever is in government, to support the transition to EVs? I mean, we had the grant, which is now reduced twice, I think, in the last year, hasn't it? And there's now no longer a grant for installing a home charger. Do you think the current government's doing enough, and what needs to be done in the future? I mean, it's a big question, but
I think they've been. I think they've jumped the gun a little bit on reducing the incentives. I think they should be putting the money into encouraging people into EVs still. I know there is a bigger uptake, but EVs are 11% of the new car market, and that still leaves 89% that isn't.
Yeah, sure.
And I do think that having the incentives on the electric cars, particularly when they dropped the price, it was, what's it, 32,000 now?
Yes, it was 40, wasn't it?
Yes, so, and they dropped it to, so I think it's anything over 32,000 doesn't get the incentive. And I just feel, I do feel slightly for manufacturers as well, who are trying their best to make these cars and make money as well. And their profit margins are shrinking. Consumers don't want to pay more, quite rightly shouldn't be paying more for EVs, and that makes it very difficult to.
I mean that cut off made a whole world of difference, because there were last figures were like 50, 60 cars that were qualified for the grant, and then suddenly there are only 10.
I think if they could even have left the incentive at £35,000 cap, or 38,000, something like that, which these days that's not an outrageously expensive car. That's kind of a fairly kind of like mid-spec, decent range EV
for a new car.
A lot of EV buyers are looking at those sort of prices. That's very, very common. So I think it's a shame that the incentive doesn't apply to vehicles like that these days, for the sake of the consumer and to a certain extent for the manufacturers as well. But it is, the cost of all its ICE cars as well as EVs, the cost of production is going up a lot. It's unfortunately consumers are going to end up kind of footing that, and I do think the government should have softened that blow. I think they've definitely taken the incentive away too soon, and I think they've taken the incentive away too soon on the home chargers. I think that's a really foolish thing to do, because it's we really need people to be putting the chargers in generally.
A lot of people write in and have asked me that, and
I
said,
know,
well, I
it's
can't.
very frustrating.
I mean, excuse me, I don't make government policy, but
I know.
it seems very short-sighted to me.
Me too. And I mean, the legislation has only just been passed this year, I believe, that property developers have to put a car charger on a new build, which I also think is mad. We seem to miss the low-hanging fruit very often in terms of the sort of, what we're incentivising people with EVs and how the government are doing that. I just think it's a bit of a shame. I definitely think that the government should still be offering more incentives than it is. I see that Tom's got a chauffeur business in Yorkshire, and he does big mileage and doesn't have the time to recharge his cars. So I think Tom is the prime example of somebody that probably isn't ready for an EV right now.
I think, we've already covered that. Biodiesel.
It's not,
absolutely. I'm sorry to be glib about this, but I'm going to say it's horses. Excuse me, horses for courses. So you buy
and
the
there are still
car
some brilliant
that best
diesel
suits your needs, really.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not saying you have to have an EV, and again, diesel's been sort of quite demonised, and a lot of people I talk to, even in the Telegraph business. People are worried about it, and they say, I've got a diesel, should I sell it? Well, if it meets the Euro 6 emission standards, which covers a lot of cars up to post-2005, 2006 certainly, it's fine. Why get rid of a car,
Yeah. No, and also there is an environment, that there is obviously an environmental benefit to keeping older cars on the road. The flip side is that they will be higher emitting, but then also the materials that are in them, and if they're a perfectly functioning car, it doesn't make any environmental sense to just scrap them for no good reason. So it is a really tricky one. It's kind of a balancing act as to whether it's greener to keep an older car on the road or to buy a new electric car. I did some figures on this a couple of years ago, so they've probably changed by now, but I remember I sort of worked it out that very roughly speaking, an old sort of 90s Saab, which is quite a high emitting car, sort of petrol Saab, would need to do about 32,000 miles, and that would be kind of, and that would offset the production of an EV.
Sure,
and then you'd be much greener in the EV. So but then that's probably changed already, because EVs get greener with the grid, and production's got greener.
All these arguments come out whenever
the figures are so variable.
Scrappage scheme is mooted, aren't they?
Exactly. And like I said, I like old cars as well. I appreciate that they're great fun, and I actually advocate the idea of, I very much want classic cars and purist enthusiast cars to stay on the roads. And I hope that we can maybe get synthetic fuels in a way of making that happen, for sure. I'm absolutely very invested in that happening. So
very interesting point, isn't it? Yeah. And the fact that a lot of people are obliged to run really cheap cars. I mean, I've done it myself as well. So when we're all struggling students and whatever, you have to run a cheap car, and obviously, let's face it, nobody earns a whacking salary these days. So
I quite routinely buy cars that cost about £2,000 or £3,000, sort of just to run those for a number of years, and most of them last as long as you want them to. So it's kind of, but they often are very expensive to fuel. So if you do a lot of mileage in them, which I typically don't, so my other half often runs around in cars like that, and they're great fun as well, and it makes a lot of sense for a lot of people.
But they're also very often enthusiast cars that are well maintained. So there's a general perception, I think, by a lot of people that if you own, I don't know, whatever, a mid to late, they finished it, but say mid-80s Ford Escort, it's just a smoky old banger. Well, not necessarily. It's like you'd have to, either really desperate or really cherish those cars.
What have you got against the Ford Escort? Is there
nothing really? No, nothing. I was trying to think of an everyday car.
But you see a lot of people running around in Mark I Ford Focuses and this kind of thing. And
what a great car. I mean, I love one personally. Exactly. Every time I see a Mark I Focus, I think it just looks so elegant and so compact compared with all the
absolutely not averse to those being on the road for as long as they need to. So obviously we're going to the new car ban from 2030, but that doesn't mean that this existing fleet of vehicles can't stay on the roads for as long as they need to. And I believe they will be on the roads for as
Yeah.
long as they need to be, because there is a huge market of people that will need them to be.
I don't think we can stress that enough, really, because again, without banging the drum, a lot of people just think, oh, all petrol and diesel cars are going to be banned in 2030. That is not the case. Legislation may change, but of course, but as things currently stand, it's only a ban on all new petrol and diesel cars, then hybrids 5 years later in 2035. So there's going to be a lot of petrol engine cars around, and cars are pretty well built these days. Just like with a bit of regular maintenance. Anything sort of made since the 90s certainly. They can do stellar mileages and with a bit of routine maintenance. So we don't have the rusting issue. Obviously, those of us of a certain age, like myself, running around in rust buckets in the early mid 70s. Cars were horrible, and they were just falling to pieces. Mark I Ford Escorts and ratty Minis and stuff, they were horrible. They were just rotted. Whereas you buy any car today that's even been vaguely well maintained, and it'll still go on. It's quite phenomenal, really. So I think we're getting off topic.
There's sort of 90s to later modern classics are really cool, aren't they? There's a lot of them out there.
Ranting about modern classics.
I know, exactly.
Forget EVs.
Keep them on the road. Kevin's says that government subsidies take money from one section of the public and give it to another. In EV terms, it's given to the relatively well off. Well, yeah, I think that's probably true, because it's those people who can afford a brand new car, and that includes mostly the more well off people. But then that also means that you're feeding the used car market, which obviously then trickles down to those people who can't afford a new car. So that has to be, that's really the only way the government could do it, as far as I can see, in terms of getting the subsidies to to the people who are buying a new car. And then it will gradually start to impact on the second-hand car market.
So.
We're seeing that now, actually.
There's a bit of obviously antipathy towards particularly the second car owners. Not always, not exclusively, but a lot. Mainly affluent suburban types with a drive where they can install a home charger, and you could get a grant and charge your car overnight on cheap electricity. That's the panacea for electric car ownership. Obviously, that doesn't suit all of us at all.
No, but we'll see, like I said, I think with the number of new EVs that have come out in the last couple of years, and they will start to trickle onto the used market, and before you know it, in a couple of years' time, you'll suddenly have kind of many more decent EVs with a 200 mile to 300 mile range becoming available for sort of 15 to 20,000 pounds, I hope. Obviously, with the used car market having been having been pushed up a lot by COVID and demand for new cars not being fulfilled and this kind of thing. There's a bit of a bubble at the moment in the used car market, which I suspect will change. But again, my crystal ball is occasionally a bit murky and not always reliable. But certainly, history tells us that as there are more EVs becoming available on the used market, they'll become cheaper, and it will help out those people who can't afford a new car. So, I've very nearly bought a BMW i3 the other day for, sort of £14,000, pure electric BMW i3, which is a fantastic car.
It's a good choice, a used EV.
Great. It's a great used car. So,
But I mean, one that we just touched on, if you want to send any more questions in, we'll need to finish fairly shortly, I'm afraid, another 5 minutes or so. But it's probably time to touch really on sort of battery longevity. We've mentioned this before, but, it's all well and good saying, just buy a used EV and they'll be more affordable, which they will be. But obviously the big concern is, will the batteries be half dead by the time you buy a car after 3 to 5 years, which is normal sort of post-lease period.
Is the short answer to that. But yes, batteries do degrade, and actually I see that Philip's put a question up there as well, saying the replacement battery costs. This is something that a lot of people worry about, but in truth, we've seen mainstream EVs now for 10 to 12 years.
Sure, yeah.
It's very, very rare that you need a replacement battery. Modern battery technology has proven to be extremely reliable, and the battery degradation is fairly minimal. So you're looking at, it seems to be roughly sort of 10 to 15% battery life loss over about 100,000 miles. Now this comes with the caveat that it depends a bit on how the battery has been maintained. So if it's rapid charged routinely, that can cause more faster battery degradation, I should say. However, if it's maintained in a reasonable fashion, then actually you should see that quite easily, if not slightly better battery life than that after that sort of mileage. You do get slightly different results from different batteries. Tesla seem to do really well with high mileage. They seem to hold their battery life really well. And just in case, I'm sure probably everybody understands what this means, but effectively all batteries lose life over time. So the battery in an EV, your maximum range when the battery is brand new will drop over time. So if you buy a used EV that's got 5 years old or 10 years old or something, then it's going to have substantially less battery life. One of the problems now is if you buy one of the cheaper used EVs, so the Mark 1 Nissan Leaf or the early Renault Zoe, this kind of thing, they had quite short battery, short range initially. So I think they've got a bit of a bad rap, because obviously you look at them now and they do 50 to 60 miles in practice, which for most people is kind of out of the question. For a lot of people who live in town, it's fine. And so, I can certainly see why a lot of people still really value them as a really short distance commuter or school run car, this kind of thing. But modern batteries do actually hold their battery life quite a bit better than that, because the battery chemistry has changed.
Yeah,
so I think it's about doing your research, and it's about looking at the car that you're considering. But the reality is that there is a reason why there's very little information out there for what a replacement battery costs, because it's so very, very rarely needed. It's
right. Okay,
it is
that's
quite.
what I was going to touch on, and obviously, it's to be hoped at least that the more EVs there are around, battery recycling costs will come down as well, and costs generally tumble for all these things. So we've got one more last question from Ed Anderson, who says, what do you say to people who think there's no environmental problems with ICE cars? Well,
I think there's an environmental problem with ICE cars and EVs, isn't there? There's an environmental problem with everything. It's a very difficult thing, but I mean, all the data seems to certainly points to the fact that EVs are much greener to run over the lifetime, inclusive of recycling and this kind of thing. But as we've already said, I have no issue with ICE cars at all, and I still advocate them to people who feel that they need them for their lifestyle. I have absolutely no issue with that, and like I've said, I think I probably generally would advocate a diesel over a plug-in hybrid for anybody who does high mileage, which then feels like you sort of end up squeezing plug-in hybrids. The purpose for them sort of becomes a bit hard to see. So, well, I mean, I think ICE cars have still have a substantial place on the roads, and I think that actually what manufacturers have done in reducing the particulates and the NOx and this kind of thing from modern diesels and from petrols is means that they're really quite impressive now. So I have no issue with ICE cars, but I do think that battery EVs are a huge part of the future, because they are more environmentally sustainable in the long term. Even as I would say that I would certainly also be interested to see what synthetic fuels can offer for keeping the current fleet of ICE cars on the road.
Hopefully we'll touch on that one on a future debate, because I mean there is so many variables to touch on. My particular wish for the future, if you like, is it's easy to say this, but just cheaper, lighter batteries, which means cheaper, lighter cars.
Absolutely the holy grail.
So
it's differences in battery technology is going to be critical, definitely.
Everybody's working towards that. But
and we've got silicon cathodes as well, this kind of thing. So more rapid charging coming, hopefully, in the near future. That again is technology that already exists and is being trialled in all sorts of different manufacturers are using it now. And that should see your more everyday EVs offering rapid, proper ultra rapid charging speeds that we've already seen in things like the Porsche Taycan, and actually, Hyundai and Kia have already done it with the Ioniq and Ioniq 5 and the EV6.
Just to mention, you get like a 27, 75, 80% charge in 20 minutes, 18 minutes, something like that.
Even a bit less than that.
Is it right? Yeah, I mean, just to get an idea.
Sort of 200 to 270 kilowatt charging, and you're looking at a 5 to 10 minute stop at the services, and then you can kind of. So it's getting on for being very nearly as convenient as a petrol and diesel car. So that will come hopefully in the near future. So technology definitely needs. We need to see faster improvements. Lighter batteries will benefit everybody. So as soon as we get lighter battery technology, I think that is more crucial than getting more range. But obviously, better energy density is all part and parcel of getting lighter batteries. So more efficient cars, lighter batteries, and that will benefit everybody. And hopefully also, if we're clever about it, maybe we can even use fewer sort of precious metals in the batteries as well. So actually reducing that kind of environmental impact of producing the batteries, which at the moment is still way too high. So using recycled metals, this kind of thing, that's all part of it too. Lots of the manufacturers looking at achieving some sort of, it won't be 100%, but getting on for 100% cyclical use of cobalt and lithium and this kind of thing, because these metals are completely reusable.
Sure, that's just obviously the cost of recycling at the moment. So, again, that cost will hopefully come down as
all of these aspects, using more recycled materials, using newer battery technology, lighter materials, all that stuff will all be part and parcel of it, I think. So hopefully all of these improvements will gradually trickle down, but it takes time, doesn't it, with all this new technology. So I think we'll still see lithium-ion for a long time yet. But certainly we'll start to see big changes in battery technology in the next sort of, I'd say, 2 to 5 years. So.
Something to look forward to anyway. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Vicky. Thank you all of you for joining us for this webinar. Afraid we have to close it there, and thanks very much for all your questions. You can still send them in if you like, and we'll get around to them a little bit later. Hopefully we'll do another one of these within a month or so, so keep an eye out for that. And again, thanks very much for joining us. Vicky Parrott and myself, Paul Hudson, thank you very much. Goodbye.